I try to keep it short, but I'm too engrossed in it. My apologies. Okay. Now the Russians, when they were here and they sold it, they all had the choice of staying or leaving, and they all left. Consequently, no Russians really remained except a few old men who had native wives. And there were many people, though, that were half mixed parentage, half, different bloods. And under the Russians, they were treated okay. They were given education, medical care. Some were working for the company. Under the Americans, do I have to tell you that people of mixed blood are treated not well at all? So around 1900, give or take, there's like 5,000 people in the whole country, in the whole area. We're not counting southeast down there where Juneau is, because they had a gold mine. And so ships could come from San Francisco and Seattle and come on up into Juneau on the Inside Passage. But we're talking about the big blob of Alaska. That's the Aleutian Chains over there. There's really no way to get into it. The government wanted the coal, they wanted the gold, and so they decided to build a railroad. It would start in Seward, which is south of Anchorage. It's a year-round ice-free port. The railroad would come up to Anchorage because we had enough flat ground for the administration, the roundhouse, whatever railroads need. It would go up to Fairbanks, where it tied in with the navigable tributaries of the Yukon River, which was open in the summer. And that's how Anchorage got started. We had our 100th anniversary about 1 or 2 years ago. I should know for sure, I'm sorry. But anyway, we're just barely 100 years old, and there was really nothing here to speak of like an established community until the railroad. We were a government town. And now, of course, half the people in Alaska live in Anchorage. Partially, according to one of the historians that spoke to us docents, was the weather. We've got good weather. You see, the mountains keep all of that rainy stuff that's in southeast away from us. We're in the shadow, and we don't. And they also quick inlet moderates our weather so that we don't get that cold that they do further north. Again, the mountains protect us and whatnot. And so, in the wintertime in Anchorage, frequently the temperature is just a little bit less than 32 degrees. In the 20s, maybe the teens. And as long as it stays there, that's fine. We live with it. We adapt beautifully to it. We don't wear sandals. And we hate it when it gets to be 32 degrees because then it gets messy. So we want it just that nice, solid cold. And the sun, I'll tell you very quickly, in Anchorage, where half the people live, 4.5 hours to 5 hours, sun is below the horizon, even now in the summertime, but we've got such long dawns and dusks that it seems like it's always light. In the wintertime, 4.5, 5 hours, it's above the horizon. But again, long dawns and dusks makes the days longer, and think how fast it has to change. Sometimes almost 6 minutes a day. So it isn't all winter, it's all dark and all cold. It's really very livable. But I'm not part of the Chamber of Commerce. If you lived up in Barrow, above the Arctic Circle, then for about 2.5 months, I think it is, the sun is not ever go below the horizon in the summer. But that's above the Arctic Circle. Remember how huge Alaska is. You can't say all of us get all dark all winter. Okay, railroad brought people to Alaska. The next thing that brought people to Alaska was the Depression. And folks from Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, that area were moved by the government to up north of Anchorage, about 40 miles to Palmer at the Matanuska Valley, great farming area. The government moved lots of people around during the Depression, and we got some of them, and there are still folks up there. That's what brought them there. The next thing that brought people to Alaska is World War II. Now, you're a large group, and it's not the greatest map and stuff, so I'm going to ask you to stay where you are and use your imaginations for the map again. The big body of Alaska, southeast Alaska down there, the Aleutian Chain over there, okay? Now, World War II, Japan bombed Alaska. Nothing like Pearl Harbor. But over there in Dutch Harbor, in the Aleutian Chain, about halfway down on the Smile, if you will, 2 days they strapped it. And there was loss of life and loss of property. Nothing like Pearl Harbor. But there they were. And then the next thing they did is they invaded 2 of our islands, the furthest 2 out on the Aleutian Chain, Attu and Kiska. 41 people living on Attu were moved to Japan in a prisoner of war camp for the duration. And then nobody was on Kiska except some military weathermen, and they were killed. We didn't like the Japanese there. We couldn't really bomb them off. There's very little place for airfields in those volcanic islands, and the weather. The joke was, if you could see your co-pilot, it's okay to take off. And so, and the planes were still ditching in the ocean, flying into the mountains, nothing to do but invade. And on Attu, it took us 2.5 weeks, and we lost over 500 men. They lost over 2,000 men, and we won. When we went to get them off of Kiska, we didn't know it, but they had snuck everybody off, and so there was no hostile fighting on Kiska. The next thing that happened during World War II is the Elcan. If we had a map, you'd see a line that went from the lower 48 up through Canada and up into Alaska, and that road was put in by the military, and it was done for support of the Lend-Lease program. We were building airplanes in our Midwest, and also in the West, and ferrying them up to Alaska, where the Russians came over, picked them up in Nome, and then flew them back across Russia, and they were used, and across Siberia, and they were used against the Germans. And that road, the highway, started military because supporting that Lend-Lease program. So lots of stuff was going on. World War II brought a lot of people to Alaska, and Alaska's like spinach. You love it or you hate it. And so when you get a lot of people coming in like that, they either stay or else they leave. And so that's just the nature of the beast up here. And so anytime we get a large group of people, such as during World War II, it really increases our population. Now, after World War II, the military stayed. We're in the Cold War. Alaska's got a lot of the DuLine radar stuff to make sure those guys from Russia weren't going to come and go down there to the lower 48. We had military up here, military's still here. We're out of the Cold War, but now remember the Arctic is opening up. There's basically no infrastructure up there on the Arctic. And so consequently, and it's only a few miles across between Russia and Alaska, so we're glad that the military's here. Please, if you're from the lower 48, remember Alaska. The United States is an Arctic country because you've got Alaska. And so it is an Arctic country, and the Arctic is almost like that's a small area, and the countries that are around it, including the United States, Canada, Russia, Norway, Denmark, which is Greenland, are all kind of working together because we've got to figure out how to handle the Arctic now that the ice is receding and boats, shipping, commercial as well as pleasure boats are going to go more and more through it with the more and more accidents and everything like that. So anyway, military's still here and we're delighted. Now we finally became a state in 1959, and then the next thing I'm going to talk about is the earthquake, and that's down here.